Hey, what's up, guys? It's been a while since we've done some Final Fantasy. I actually had a pretty damn long day, honestly. So I thought it was time for some therapeutic Final Fantasy VI. And this is one of those things that I'm sure I mentioned early on in the playthrough, but although I've played this game a lot, I've lost track of how many times I've played it. I tried to play the game all the way through, and sometimes, admittedly, I'll play through maybe half of it, and I'm like, I just move on to other things because I've just played it so many times. I can, recite the lore bit by bit. But because I've played it so much, not really because, but even though I've played it so much, there are still things that I forget or just don't know, actually, when it comes to the gameplay, when it comes to where certain things are hidden in the maps. When it comes to that, when it comes to kind of hidden items and stuff like that, that's typically stuff that I've just forgotten over the years, or it just doesn't seem to stick. And there's actually quite a few items in the game that it just never seems to stick where they are. And this level, this underground passage of South Figaro here, it's kind of a good example of an area where there are some hidden passageways here that lead to some pretty useful items. And every time I come through this area, I seem to forget where the passageways are, and it just takes a little bit of exploration. So, at the start of this one, I'm primarily... Well, first of all, I've picked up Celeste here. I've freed her from captivity. She's a traitor to her own kind now, and she's one of us now, basically, and we're trying to get the hell out of here. We're using this hidden underground passage to get out of town. And the next order of business, as soon as we get out of town, is we are going to be trying to head back to Narsh, actually, and meet up with the rest of our party members. And here's me kind of testing the waters here. I'm like, hey, did I find it? No, I didn't. Oops. But it's around here somewhere, and it doesn't take me too long to kind of to feel it out. But these encounters are definitely on the annoying side. Pretty much all you get down here, in fact, I think all you get down here are these commanders and vector pups. And the trick of this fight, or those encounters, is really... I can't really say it's a trick, but what basically happens is, as soon as one dog is left alone, it will bolt every time. It will try to escape. And more often than not, it'll escape before you get a chance to finish it. And that's fine, right? Because, there's one of those hidden items. It's actually a ribbon, which very useful item in the game. It's going to allow us to just ignore pretty much every status element there is. So, good stuff there. One of the best relics to have. Certainly, come mid to late game, it's a relic that you're going to want multiple, if not the majority of your party equipped with. Especially some encounters, which can be nastier than others in terms of putting, debilitating effects on your party members that are just really annoying to deal with. Anytime you're having to waste a turn using an item to purge a party member of some sort of status effect, you're doing things slightly inefficiently. I guess not inefficiently, but just not ideally. Ideally you want to be using those turns, obviously, for inflicting damage on your opponents, or team healing, preventative measures, augment type effects. And there's another thing. As much as I've played the game even though some playthroughs I might, I might be more inclined to level my characters up to, pretty, I guess, like, slightly overpowered status. It's really easy to use one or two or three of the many spells available to you in the game to just pretty much wipe the floor with opponents. Like haste effects in particular are pretty disgusting in this game. They kind of take away some of the fun. I feel like most of the fights in this game anyway really aren't much of a challenge. I don't really think it's meant to be too much of a challenge. Now, when you're playing through the game at a pretty fast pace, I'm pretty much playing through at a pretty damn fast pace for this playthrough. I'm not skipping content, mind you, but I'm definitely not going to be stopping at any point along the way to be doing any kind of grinding. The only time I might perhaps do anything like that is going to be to learn higher levels of spells, and really not, so much for, my own sake, but just maybe as a demonstration of something that I think is interesting or cool in the game. I might level up. I might level up some of my magic height to the point where I've got some decent spells on some of my characters. But we'll see about that when the time comes. And we're out of here. Now, I missed that last little bit of dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue in this one, actually. And although I have been reading the majority of it, if not all of it, throughout the playthrough, there might be some moments in this episode where I'm mid-thought and I might decide not to read the dialogue out loud. So if you are trying to follow the dialogue, make sure that you're perhaps glancing at it just in case I don't, and you're interested in what's being said, mind you. There's a chance I might not read it out loud, this one. But yeah, the end, I think, is just one of the lengthier, story bits in the game. It's just lots of heavy dialogue, a little bit of character development. Obviously, we've been split up for some time now. The party has, the known party. And whenever we got split up, our party wasn't fully formed yet. In fact, it's still not fully formed. There's still plenty of people that we're going to be picking up throughout the game. So the party is actually quite far from being fully formed. But my point is that ever since the split, there's been some individuals that have been picked up along the way, and not everyone has had a chance to meet yet. But yeah, here's Mount Colts, and as you can see here, the Empire has taken possession. Unfortunately, we can't go here. I remembered something, and it didn't dawn on me until I was checking my inventory a few minutes ago when we were still down in the tunnels. I noticed that I had somehow forgotten to pick up the Atlas Armlet from Mount Colts. Not that big of a deal. It is useful for us now, though. I would definitely like to have it on Locke. It is a physical damage increase, so it's going to increase the damage of basic attacks, and that's kind of all that Locke does. That's kind of all that I gear Lockout to do for the most part. He might learn some spells here and there, but for the most part, he's just going to be hitting the fight button and the steal button for the entirety of the game. Steal is really his bread and butter, and he can get some multi-attack capabilities later on if you hit him up with the right relics and the right weaponry. He can become quite the effective fighter, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, this is an important part of the game to actually have Locke at full capacity in regards to his fighting ability, because you only have a couple people in your party here. You're stuck with Locke and Celeste. Fortunately, Celeste takes care of things on the magic side. I typically tried to gear her out to be a caster. I think I think that's what she was really intended for. Her runic ability, you're going to see me using that almost, I think, exclusively in the final boss. Because, well, the final boss can actually wipe you quite easily with some nasty magic abilities. And what runic does is it actually nullifies those magic attacks. It just, boom, she just basically puts out the magic effect before, you know, your opponent has a chance to cast it on you. So it just, in turn, gets completely nullified. And I think there are a few cases where runic does not work with some magic. I'll point that out when the time comes. Still going to be a while, I think, before runic can get outclassed by some of those spell attacks. And to be perfectly honest, it's another example of just one of the little tidbits of knowledge in the game that I really don't know in depth. I couldn't tell you every single spell that runic does not affect. But there are some, and there's some powerful ones too. Some late game spells. Another one of those spells that, you know, is perhaps a little too potent for my tastes is Ultima. You know, like the spell suggests, it's a pretty high tier spell, right? You're not going to be using Ultima until the late game, or learning it, or getting a chance to learn it for that matter. But it is, what Ultima is basically is just a massive area of effect attack that does insane amounts of damage to everyone on screen. If you're casting it, it's not going to hurt you, mind you. It will only hurt enemies. But if an enemy casts it on you, it's going to affect your whole team, and it's going to hurt a lot. But anyway, we're a while from Ultima playing any kind of role in the game. There are some annoying attacks here. I think antidotes pretty much fix most of the status elements in here, if not all of them. Let me see. I think a lot of them seem to be kind of like water-type creatures, ocean-type creatures. A lot of those, what you call it, like stingray-type creatures and whatnot that we fought in the Lette River. So, you know, as a result, you know, water-type creatures have a, you know, pretty big vulnerability to ice. So Celeste is huge here. Her ice spell is devastating to many of these creatures. And here is the final boss, actually. I'll draw its magic attack. It won't hurt us. Well, thank you, Celeste. Thank you for, you know, hitting us up with that useful information. But yeah, I was kind of talking about this earlier. I was kind of missing some dialogue here. Just you watch. But yeah, Celeste is pretty studly here. And I think pretty much just every time her turn comes up, I'm popping runic. Boom, there it is right there, fire. So there we go. Prime example of, and I kind of forgot to mention this, huh? But it does, whenever she does absorb a spell, it heals her. Now, granted, it heals for such a minor amount, it may as well just not even heal at all, right? So, yeah, kind of why I didn't mention that. It's just not really worth mentioning. But this is definitely worth mentioning. I actually haven't been paying attention quite enough. I don't know if I have stolen Bioblaster yet or not, but the tunnel armor, actually, the Air Lancet is really what I want here, but you can steal a Bioblaster as well, I believe. I actually cannot recall if I stole it or not, but I definitely wanted to make sure I got the Air Lancet. It's actually a pretty good weapon for Locke, but I think it's an even better weapon for Mog once we get an opportunity to grab him and incorporate him in the party. He's pretty damn cool as well, man. Those dance moves that he's got, definitely a viable character. One of my favorites to have in the mid to late game. But yeah, as you can see here, Celeste just eating this boss alive, basically, with her runic ability. The boss really isn't much of a threat when you're just using every single turn to use runic. Now, he does throw out physical attacks, and obviously, runic doesn't affect those. So you do have to top yourself off every now and then. That tech laser, if that happens to hit you, boy, is it gonna hurt. But yeah, just there he goes. Really not much of a threat. Just because Celeste is just too damn good, and she's basically made to counter this boss somewhat perfectly. Woo, looks like we're in the clear. Alright, let's get the hell out of here. Okay, yeah, and this is the long stretch of dialogue that I was referring to earlier on in the episode, excuse me. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to read any of this. It's just 5-6 minutes pretty much straight of dialogue, and I'm just not going to do that. There is some interesting things being said here, so instead I'm going to talk a little bit about the lore. I'll talk a bit on what I like in this scene. Basically, the gist of it is, the beginning at least, is we're kind of reconfirming our suspicions that we've been having throughout the game. The War of the Magi, the Empire's rise to power. They're harnessing this dreadful power of magic, which tore the world apart almost in the events of the War of the Magi. So now that they're harnessing this magic, they're developing it into technology, basically. They're infusing their technology with this magic. They're seeking out the Espers. We know that it's only a matter of time, and perhaps it's going to be sooner rather than later when the devastating events that were the War of the Magi are going to basically repeat themselves. That's essentially what we're reconfirming at the beginning here. We get to see who we've acquired up to this point finally meet each other, which is great. We get to see some of the personalities clashing, which to me is one of the most interesting parts of these events, especially towards the end. And this isn't really a clash of personalities, but Terra and Celeste, they both have a lot to learn from one another, especially Terra has a lot to learn from Celeste because of her past experiences with the Empire. They both have a lot in common, both having being affiliated with the Empire at one point, both having the gift of magic. You get to find out a little bit more about Celeste, which is great. I think that she's a very interesting character. I always wanted to see a little bit more development from Celeste in terms of her transition from being one of the top dogs in the Empire, a general, even, to coming over to this ragtag group of adventurers. And obviously she's got a good heart, and we know that from the story, and we love her for that. But you don't really get to see a lot of the transition between her realizing that she's not on the right side, but obviously, Cyan is very untrusting of Celeste, and we can understand that because of, the recent events that happened with Cyan. He lost his family at the hands of Kefka and the Empire. Unfortunately, the hands of Kefka. So it's understandable that he's completely apprehensive about letting Celeste in any respect at all. But Celeste, one of the coolest things about her, and that I guess it's kind of a brief backstory on her, and you actually get to find out a little bit about that, I think, shortly in Terra and Celeste's dialogue between each other. But Celeste, you can understand why she was on the wrong side of things initially, because she was basically raised this way from childbirth. The Empire has been, as far as I know, and this is how I like to interpret it, I think that the Empire's probably been infusing children with magic for a while, as part of their own program to become more powerful and advance themselves. And Celeste is a prime example of that. So she was kind of indoctrinated in early, and it's only because she has that good heart down deep that she was able to make the right decisions in the end. That's the way I like to interpret it, at least. But there is a lot that's kind of glossed over in terms of her story. There's a lot of characters in this fucking game, man. A lot of characters, a lot of development for each character. Some get more attention than others. One of the reasons why I love this game so much to this day is because I grew up with a lot of these characters. I grew up loving a lot of these characters, especially Shadow and Locke. Those were always two of my favorite characters. And in, I guess some of the more recent years, Edgar as well, one of my absolute favorite characters. Oh, and here's some of that dialogue that I was just talking about a little bit as, one of my favorite parts of these events here. Yeah, you get to see this right here. So she was basically artificially infused, and it's completely understandable, how Celeste ended up on the wrong side of things. Celeste again here, kind of, the point of intrigue for a lot of our characters here, especially Cyan, who's completely untrusting. But that's it, guys. Whew. See you on the next one.